evening. You're very welcome to our very first edition of Centre Ground. It's a live stream that will go out weekly on Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock, and we will be bringing some of the great activists from around the country to chat to you about their work. And all of this is made possible by Stephen Kerr at the Irish Inquiry. Stephen has kindly allowed me to use his platform to go out live each week. So, Stephen, you have put a huge amount of work in for the last week or so in making tonight's broadcast possible. So, you must be very excited now that the fruits of your labour have come to pass.
Yeah, absolutely, Anna. Like that was the plan the whole time, was to kind of bring more voices, get more presenters involved, and get more diverse opinions. So I had to start it off. We did the first couple of 5 episodes, all based on COVID-19. But I've been following a lot of your stuff for a long time, and you know, you've just got your personal page there on Facebook with 5,000 friends or whatever, and you've got to 25,000 followers, I think. Like, so I followed your stuff for a long time, and I know you have some great contacts. So I'm delighted to have you join us tonight. You know, and hopefully in time we can bring on a few more presenters and get more opinions out there and do something a little bit different than the mainstream media do, where they just go back to the same contributors week after week. So my role, I'm not really going to be involved tonight. It's over to you. You have your own guests. You can introduce them in time. And my only function really is just to facilitate the discussion, and any comments that come in, I'll be able to put them up on the screen, and maybe towards the end of each of your interviews with your various guests, you can have a look at them and you can put some of those comments to your guests if you'd like as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephen. And to those of you who have just joined us on the live stream, I'd just like to introduce the guests that I have lined up for tonight. First of all, we have Enda Craig from Buncrana Together, followed by Peter Silke, and Luke is a journalist and a blogger. Then we have Margaret Lennon from DCA Warriors, and finally Marion McGowan. Marion is a lecturer, a journalist, and she's a civil rights activist for many decades. And Marion will be joining us each week to anchor our panel discussion programme. Our panel discussion that takes place in the second part of the programme. So, first up then is Enda. Enda, I'd like to welcome you to Centre Ground, and I thank you very much for agreeing to join us here tonight. So, Enda, many people will already know you from your activism over many decades. You are a member of Buncrana Together, and you successfully took the Irish government to as far as the EU Commission, and as a result of that, they had to bring in new legislation. You were also before in the water charges movement and the movement to protect our water from being private. Tonight, you're coming to us in a private capacity. You're going to chat to us about what happened to you when you found yourself in an A&E. Now, we won't name the hospital and we won't name any of the personnel involved. So maybe you might just describe what happened to you when you found yourself in A&E.
Okay, thanks very much for having me, Anna. I appreciate it. Looking forward to doing this. Not that used to, but nevertheless, I appreciate that time is short, so I'll try and get through it as quickly as I can. I could talk about it for a week, but I'll pick out the salient points as I see them. I'll begin and tell you that I'm of an age now where I'll be taking the odd run to hospital. I've already had a few, probably more coming up. And, you know, I've always had good experiences, mostly anyway. And on this particular occasion that I'm going to speak about, I had a dreadful experience. And about 15 months ago, I was in the ED in a particular public HSE hospital, and a senior member of the emergency department staff behaved in a very unprofessional way, and actually I considered she abused me as the night wore on, and I felt that I was justified in taking it up and making a complaint, which I did. I assumed it would be very easily dealt with, but I felt that she should be called to account for what she did. Anyway, made contact with the complaints section in the hospital, and they contacted the consultant in charge of that particular department of the emergency department. As it turned out, he wouldn't speak to us. He wouldn't speak to my wife. He wouldn't speak to me. So I was left with no alternative other than to go through the process. And the first part of the process is you have to make a written complaint, and they respond to it. I sent in a complaint anyway. Got a lot of help from the complaints officer in the particular hospital. She was very, very good, absolutely brilliant. But, the nightmare started the minute I sent it in, because I sent in a 2-page complaint, and I got a 25-page complaint back from this particular consultant. The thing about it, Anna, was that when I read it, I couldn't actually believe what I was reading, because I found out that this particular consultant, he blackened me from morning to night, from top to bottom, and I was looking at something and it was mostly to do with CCTV coverage of the ED department that night, which I didn't even know they had ED in it. Anyway, I made inquiries, and I was very lucky to get a copy of the CCTV that night that he was using. I found out afterwards that the management was very, very annoyed that I was given a copy of the CCTV, and that actually explains a little bit why this particular consultant felt that he could demonize me and blacken me in all directions, because he was totally convinced that I would never see the CCTV.
So if I can just hold you there, just to recap on what happened. You're in the hospital and you were extremely badly treated, and then you sent in a written complaint, 2-page written complaint, and you got back a 25-page report. And on screen now we can actually see the handwritten notes, the clinical notes that were made that night. And I think there will be a clip coming up now. Yes, you're now looking at an extract from the actual report that came back to you, that you got back, the 25-page report. And what we can see is that the report that came back to you quotes the clinical notes, but there's a mismatch. So can you tell us a little bit about that mismatch?
Yeah, actually, the word I used, and I took a legal opinion on it to make sure I could use it, and they covered me and said the clinical incident report, which you have shown there, which is a very important, it's actually a legal document internal to the hospital, and this particular consultant felt that he could falsify the wording. In other words, actually what happened is that the lady that gave me the doing that night, because I asked her for her name afterwards and a sheet of paper, she knew that I was going to make a complaint, or she felt that I was. So to cover her backside, she generated what they call a clinical incident report. And in it, she made out that I was not a good boy. So anyway, the consultant got wind of that, and he used it in his response to me. But he felt that she didn't blacken me enough. So he said he would do a better job on it, and you can actually see that when he put his wording down, which was supposed to be the actual wording on the original report, but he completely changed it. Could change it to the extent that I was not. He actually introduced a sentence that didn't appear in the original at all. So here you have somebody that you feel is going supposedly to be there to help solve the problem that arose, the complaint that you have. And one of the first things he does is he falsifies a very important internal document totally against me. So that's one thing that I caught him on. Again, I got a copy of the original, and I was told afterwards I should never have gotten. I was so lucky to get things that normally people don't get. If I didn't get them, I would be wasting my time. I wouldn't be speaking to you tonight, Anna, because I would be under a bus and dragging myself out. Anyway, when I got the copy of the CCTV, which he had used in his 25-page report, and I went through it in great detail. Not only did I go through it in great detail, but I had a number of very highly regarded people, politicians and academics, who sat down in my house and went through the CCTV and then checked the wording that he used. And all we could see was he deliberately misinterpreted the wording of what he saw on the CCTV, and always he interpreted to blacken me, to completely, he accused me of this, he accused me of that.
Okay.
I actually didn't recognize myself.
Can I just interrupt you there? And so we're now at the stage where you have received this 25-page report from the consultant where he has falsified the evidence, as it were, not knowing that you had a copy of the clinical notes and you also had a copy of the CTV footage. So you then contacted the hospital, I take it, to alert them to this. What happened then?
Yes, I'll actually, just to finish off on the CCTV, not only did we see that he was telling absolute complete lies from beginning to end, but we also found that he actually fabricated an incident supposedly on the CCTV that where the person that she cried in fear and she put her hands up in a defensive manner. That gives the impression that I was about to strike. When we actually went to the CCTV, it's not there. It's a complete figment of his imagination. He actually concocted it, fabricated it, and put it in there, thinking that I would never see it, and nobody would be able to challenge it. So that guy deliberately fabricated an incident to blacken me, to save the reputation of the hospital and to save the reputation of a member of his team who had actually abused and treated me very badly. This is quite unbelievable. And had I not got access to these, it would have been lost.
Yes, it's
so anyway,
it's really unbelievable, given that we're talking here about a senior consultant. So we just to move it on then, what happened next? What was the next step that happened with the hospital?
I was on a learning curve here, and I was all the time wondering, well, what's my next step and what's my next move? And the process is that if you're not happy with the response, which of course I wasn't, they tell you then that you have recourse to go to internal review, and they call it an independent. And I said, well, okay, and who's doing that? And I found out that it's a middleman. He's part of the group of hospitals. So again, it's in-house. You can look at it any way you like. It's an in-house, and why they call it independent is more than I knew. No, because it absolutely is not justified in referring to it as independent. It's in-house, and as it turned out, Anna, this gentleman is of a lesser grade than those whose work he was now looking at and beginning to assess. So I ask you in all fairness, what do you think of the chances of a middle management calling out or criticizing something that has been put together by very, very senior management? It's only a joke, really. So I wasn't surprised that when he gave his report, the appeal report in relation to his independent assessment of it, he actually added to the abuse another layer of abuse on top of it. He sided completely with the hospital, and he actually suggested that I should make an apology to the person who abused me. No, I think that's pretty good.
It's quite unbelievable. So now, just to move it forward, you then took your case to the Ombudsman.
I did, and I spoke to him this morning, and I had great hopes that actually he's the Ombudsman, but I was speaking to an investigator in the Ombudsman's office, and I have spoken to him on many occasions, and spoke to him this morning, and I was hopeful, Anna, because I knew that the gentleman whose photograph you put up there, Mr. Tyndall, who is the actual Ombudsman, When he came into the job some years ago, the first thing that he noticed was that there was a very, very small number of complaints in Ireland against public hospitals. By international standards, we were at the bottom of the tree. We hardly had anybody complaining. So he decided to do a national survey to try and find out how come. Is the HSE that fantastic that nobody feels like complaining? And he actually found out that the word came back, nobody could be bothered complaining because they were convinced they would get nowhere. It was a waste of time. And anyway, they also were afraid that even if they or anybody belonging to them had to go back into hospital, they were convinced that it would be taken out on them and that we would be punished for making a complaint in the first instance. So he set about and he said, he looked at the whole thing and he put together a booklet called Getting Things Better. He wants to install a whole new protocol that will make people's complaints more looked at, they will get a fairer hearing, and that you will feel that maybe you're getting somewhere and you're not going to be put under the bus. Because actually what happened to me, Anna, is that I had a senior consultant. He sent the 25 pages to the hospital manager and the director of nursing. They signed off on it, didn't find a thing wrong, and now they send it to the internal review manager. He found nothing wrong. In fact, he added to it. And so by the time I get to the ombudsman, I'm just a squeaky little voice from the hills of Donegal, trying to tell him that all these people have conspired against me and that they, in fact, are the ones that are telling the lies. So you can imagine how tilted the dice is, how tilted the thing is, that you have huge amount of weight against you when you land with the ombudsman. And he actually told me, he says, the biggest problem that I have, or that I notice, is that by the time people get to me, those few that do come my way, it's the fact that they feel terribly aggrieved that they're not believed when they made their initial complaint. Because as happened with me, the whole thing was turned head over heels, and me, the abused, had become the abuser in the eyes of the senior management in Letterkenny, in the hospital, and that now I'm coming to him with this huge amount of weight, and I'm expecting that he's going to listen to me and say to the rest of those heavyweights, sorry guys, you're all wrong. This little puny little guy, 5'8" from the hills of Donegal, is actually right, so I'm fighting against you. The system is so rotten, Anna. It is so absolutely, I cannot get the words to describe how bad I think it is.
Okay, well, to end on a positive note, and your case is currently before the Ombudsman, and we won't comment on that because the Ombudsman has yet to make a judgment on it, or the Office of the Ombudsman has yet to make a judgment of that, and we're not going to preempt that. But I suppose the one thing that really shines out tonight is how you followed due process. And I suppose the important message that we want to send out to people tonight is that if they do fall foul of a state agency, they have to follow the complaints procedure for the body involved before you can then escalate it to the Ombudsman.
Yeah, you gotta take your time. You got to have patience, and you're in a hurry to try to get resolution. Forget about that. Sit well back. This is a very slow process. The only thing I said to you, Anna, and I said it today to the Ombudsman investigator that I've spoken to, I said, there's an awful lot of people watching this. I said, because I'm quite different to anybody else that has come your way, and I'll tell you why. Most people that come your way do not have any proof. All they have is their word and their version of what happened to them. I actually have the CCTV that proves that I'm telling the truth. I actually have a copy of the clinical incident report that proves that this a very senior consultant falsified it. So I think that I've got a pretty good reason to be coming to you. And I think if you want to prove that you're more than just hot air and that you're just not aspirational to change things for the better, here is a perfect example. I'll be watching it, and I'm telling you, an awful lot of other people will be watching, and they will take great heart if you do what you're saying you're going to do.
Okay, well, we'll leave it at that, and thank you so much for sharing your story. It's hugely inspirational, and we'll all be watching now as to what will be the outcome of your case with the Ombudsman, and we will be coming back to you later on during our panel discussion. So next up now, I'd like to introduce Luke Peter Silke. Luke Peter first came to my attention. He was writing wonderful blogs that really were capturing what's happening in Ireland as regards current affairs and things that are really quite wrong in the country. Beautifully written and very, very reasonable. And since then, I have got to know Luke Peter, and Luke Peter is from Galway. And tonight he's going to chat to us about what happened when he sent in a Freedom of Information request in relation to Mayo University Hospital. So, Peter, I suppose the first thing that I'm really curious about, how did a man from Galway become interested in the case of a hospital in Mayo? Are we
struggling slightly? I suppose the first time I became interested in this topic was 5th of May, when the issue dramatically raised at Department of Health press briefing. Now, it was interesting. The case that was raised at that specific press briefing, that of Sally Maz, who was a student, a young 17-year-old student from Ballyhonus in Mayo, and they were alleging that she had been moved ward. She was a heart patient, I believe. She had a heart condition. She was in hospital, and she was moved into a COVID ward just shortly after she died. Now, I have a friend there in Mayo, in Knock, actually. Paul Lawless is his name, and he's involved in politics. He's contested a few elections and that. So I got in touch with him, just curious, I suppose, as to whether or not people in his area were raising concerns with him of a similar nature. And sure enough, he said they had. And then another case broke, and that was of Jackie Carolan. He was a 79-year-old man from the Ballina direction, and he was a stroke patient. And very similar kind of story to the student in Ballyhonus. He was a stroke patient, and he it seems contracted the virus in the hospital and subsequently died. So the allegation that was being made by many people was that they were being moved from non-COVID wards into COVID wards within the hospital, that there was crossover between staff and patients, and that there wasn't really any control. The virus was spreading pretty rapidly in there. Now, Paul Lawless, my friend in Mayo, he's involved in the party Aimtu. So he raised the issue then with his party leader, who's Peadar Tobin TD. And Peadar put in a written question then to the Department of Health on the issue. And the Minister for Health at the time, Simon Harris, promised that he was seeking a report from the HSC on the issues of crossover in Mayo University Hospital. Around the same time as that written question, I would have issued a number of Freedom of Information requests myself, and so would my friend Paul. And we did get stuff back. So we got correspondence. We targeted the office of the Chief Medical Officer, Tony Houlihan, and the CEO of the HSC West, the SAILSA group, here in the west of Ireland. And we got a number of documents back from both of those requests. And one of those documents then identified a third case. So we already had the case of the elderly man and the student, but there was a third case. Now, the names were redacted, but it was evidently a different case to the other two because it concerned a cancer patient whose family were alleging in a complaint to the Department of Health and to the HSE that their loved one was moved and that there were no protection controls in the hospital. So what was fascinating about that is that case and that complaint wound up on the desk of the Chief Medical Officer the day that the issue was raised at the press briefing. So it was very strange to see that there had been a kind of an internal Department of Health discussion about this in advance or on the same day as the issue was raised at the press briefing.
So if I could just pause you there, a journalist from Mayo actually raised this issue with the CMO, Dr. Tony Holohan, at a press briefing. And actually, she was castigated for several days across social media. And a lot of people might remember that incident. And I think it actually was covered in some of the mainstream papers at the time. And certainly was covered in the papers in Connacht. So I suppose that was a classic case, really, of the messenger being shot.
Yeah, I suppose it was. Now, I didn't necessarily agree myself with, I suppose, the conduct at that press briefing. I felt that there were too much badgering or that sort of thing. And I believe she said she was there from the, I think it was the Western News. And I don't think such a publication exists. So I wouldn't have gone about it in the same way that she did, but there's a story there undeniably, you know. So when we got the stuff back and we identified this third case, there were two journalists that were real eager and you know, have been covering this story. One of them was Catherine Fegan in the Irish Independent, and another one was Teresa O'Malley with Midwest Radio. So they discussed these things extensively. We got two different sets of documents. One identified that third case of the cancer patient, and another one then would have been correspondence received by local councillors in Mayo from concerned staff. So what was revealed in some of those was just shocking stuff. The staff were embarrassed, frustrated, they were threatening to protest. They had planned a lunchtime protest at around the time that these documents were done. So we drip-fed those documents then to the media, and I suppose kept the story alive. And all the while we were calling for a progress update on the report that Simon Harris had asked Paul Reid for. And we were getting nowhere with that. Eventually then we got it under Freedom of Information. It was a 7-page report, now very carefully worded, so it didn't really level criticisms as such. You couldn't really call it a damning report, but it identified areas that need improvement, you know, or ways that we can better improve the hospital, which is, you know, highlighting the stuff that went wrong when you read between the lines. So then that report was covered extensively. Now, very curiously, the report was, when the media were discussing it, and it was in all local newspapers, it was on the radio, it was in national papers, I believe the Times Ireland and the Irish Independent were covering it. When that broke, there was commentary from the then Minister for the region, who was Dara Cleary, who, as we know, has since resigned his ministry. But he said that he had been trying to get a hold of that report. So he said that he had been seeking access to the report for weeks. So when challenged by journalists, he said he'd only seen it around the time that it was released to us and to the media under Freedom of Information. Now, we know that had been sitting on the Minister for Health's desk since, I believe it was the 19th of June. And this is only maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago we got the documents released to us. So it was very curious that there was a cabinet minister claiming that he was requesting a copy of the report, which the other minister had, which related to his constituency, and had to rely on unelected representatives to get a copy of that report under the Freedom of Information Act. It seemed there was a bit of a communication breakdown there. So it was very concerning. And then, of course, that we were questioning that how did this happen? But it was, I think, about the same day that the Golfgate scandal blew up. So all the attention turned away from our story and over onto that situation then. So
I suppose really your story is very, very inspirational in that just because of your interest in what was happening and using FOI, you managed to get this information. And has there been any change now in hospital practices in Mayo University General Hospital since you've released all of this information to mainstream media and they've run the story?
There is indeed. I've never seen authorities to act so fast. I mean, the story broke on a Friday. By that Monday, there were builders in the hospital. There was going to be structural alterations. There were some wards, for example, that were sharing bathrooms, and the report had identified this as a concern. But almost immediately after the story broke, you know, there's a new 50-bed unit has now been promised for Mayo University Hospital. As I say, the workers actually turned up on the Monday, the next working day. But it was fascinating. I suppose my concern when I was talking to my friend who was involved in politics in Mayo, my concern and his concern was that he was receiving correspondence from members of the public who were very concerned about the safety of the hospital. So they were worried, they talk about the non-COVID mortality. That was really the primary concern. We were afraid people were hearing these stories from inside the hospital, and they were afraid to go to the hospital, and they were suffering. Their health and even their lives, were in danger because they were refusing to seek medical help. So what we wanted to establish through asking the questions and pushing this story so vigorously was that the hospital was safe, that things were now under control. And we did establish that, it would seem, and there's going to be these improvements. That would be my message to anyone from the region that the hospital serves, Roscommon, or, well, not Roscommon, but that area, Mayo as well, that it is safe to go to hospital. And if you're at home and you're sick and you're worried, should I go to hospital or not, I'd be inclined to go to hospital. The other thing is that the families who were in touch really deserve answers. It is a national scandal, and I think I would urge more people to come forward. I'm hearing loads of people on the street, and you'd be talking to people, who'd say, this is what happened to my family member who was in the hospital at that time. I think we need to get public with these stories and keep the foot on the pedal. But also I think we need to be prudent when we're campaigning on issues like this. We need to, like as I was saying, we got the documents under freedom of information, and we had 3 different sets of documents released to us. So that kept the story alive. It was every week there was a new bit of information that we could get on the radio about or get into the media with. So I think that's the main thing.
And I suppose, yes, it's a really good news story, and it shows the power of one person using FOI and then being able to work with mainstream media, having got that information, and the power of mainstream media then to get the story out there, and then that brings about pain. So it's hugely, hugely inspirational story. And thank you for sharing it with us this evening, and you'll join us later on in our panel discussions. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So, next up now is Margaret Lennon, and Margaret is here tonight to speak on behalf of DCA Warriors. And I've come to know Margaret through a mutual friend, and this mutual friend is part of the story. So we let the story unfold. So Margaret, thank you so much for joining us tonight on Central Ground.
Thank you, Anna.
Maybe you might just tell us a little bit about DCA Warriors.
Okay, we started DCA Warriors, 4 of us, in 2012. We were on Facebook. There was a discussion of children having a payment called DCA removed on review. So it's domiciliary care allowance. Now, to get that payment, you have to jump a very high bar. But the Department of Social Protection had took over the administration of the scheme from the HSE. And suddenly all these children who had qualified were suddenly reviewed, and they didn't qualify anymore. And this also meant their parents would be receiving carers allowance. Often carers have to give up their jobs or their further education, etc., that they planned. So that meant, in effect, these families were going to be destitute, and some of them were left with nothing. And they couldn't go on unemployment benefit because they had to be there to care for the children. So we decided we'd set up this little page, and we did. And very quickly we realised there was going to be a whole lot of other issues. So the name of the group is DCA Warriors, but it's Dedicated Children's Advocacy Warriors. That's what we're called. So we made a lot of inroads. We looked for the domiciliary care scheme to be completely reviewed, which was achieved. We got 2 seats on the DCA review group meetings, which lasted for 7 years. Other things that we would have done, an excellent lady, or an excellent person told me about assessment of need. The HSE had decided they were going to develop new standard operating procedures, and they were in place, but nowhere could a copy of the new standard operating procedures be found. They weren't published, which was interesting. So long and short, I tracked down a person who would give me a copy. And when I got them, I was absolutely appalled that they had really taken away anything that was going to guarantee the children anything rights-based, because the assessment of need is actually underpinned by the Disability Act. If you refer your child, or a GP refers your child, you're entitled to have the assessment done and a statement of need issued to you within 6 months of the referral. Now, the statement of need is actually a legally binding document, which a lot of people don't actually realise. They also don't realise that their children are being referred basically onto different lists, which are in effect just waiting lists where they'll have no legal rights whatsoever. So we started a campaign, and we ended up testifying before the Oireachtas Committee on the assessment of need. Our members are incredible, you see. They give us huge amount of information. We decide then what we can take in with us. We would have brought in a whistleblower, came to us, for example, in the education system, gave us a lot of information on the abuse of resource hours within the education system. They have done a protected declaration. We have met with the Department of Education. We want action. We don't go in and say, look, be nice to us. That's grand, but we want action, all of these things. So the Supreme Court case is another issue. Go ahead. You were going to say something to me, Emma.
That's what I was just going to
Right.
to bring on to, Margaret. You
Yes.
a recent victory in the Supreme Court, and so you might just give a background to that case and
I will.
tell us briefly how you ended up in the Supreme Court.
Okay. So 2 children. The first child, we'll call A, has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. In effect, what that means is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a connective tissue disorder. It affects all the skin, the tissues, the organs, everything. Postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome is an autonomic disorder, which means basically everything that your brain unconsciously controls. In dysautonomia or POTS, this is defective. So you have children who will stand up, we'll say, for moving from lying down to sitting up, or sitting down to standing up, they get a huge drop in blood pressure.
Okay.
And massive rise in heart rate.
Okay, so Margaret, what was it that you were seeking for these children?
Okay, the other child has spina bifida and a number of other issues. So with the POTS, the EDS case and the POTS case, there are no medical experts in Ireland. There is no medical team at all in Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Now, I contacted Anne Mix today from EDS Ireland, EDS and HMS, the Irish page. I wanted the figures, and she said a rough estimate is there's over 1,000 diagnosed and adults, and there's well over 250 children diagnosed. Now, the Minister for Health, the last figures I saw, there is quite a discrepancy there. He is stating that there is less than 50 cases of EDS in Ireland. Now, of course, in order to have a diagnosis, you need to have a doctor who knows what they're looking at.
Oh, okay, Margaret, but can you tell me, please,
Sure.
What was the court case about?
What the court case was about was the youngster who has EDS and POTS. The medical conditions weren't diagnosed here. unfortunately, and this led to the child ending up out of school, being granted 2 hours of home tuition, which meant they were also deprived of their education. Now, the parents went to the HSE. The physiotherapist in the HSE did a risk assessment, told both parents and the child on 2 occasions that there was to be no walking outside because there was such a high risk of falls. The OT in the HSE came to the family's home and asked the child, would they use a power chair? That was the only safe way of getting around, and the child agreed. So the parents said, well, look, won't I need an adaptive vehicle? And the response was from the OT, yes, and there'd be no problem getting it. Most of the clients are much worse off than this child. So at a meeting later on in the month with a team, the OT said she had changed her mind, that wasn't going to offer this, what was recommended, and not to bother applying for the primary medical cert. It wouldn't be given. So the
OT is
occupational
therapist, and she's employed by the HSE.
HSE, and the physiotherapist is as well. So look, the family applied then for the primary medical cert in January 2017, and the area medical officers in the HSE take care of all these. The family didn't know until after the fact that the area medical officer had contacted the physiotherapist for a report, and neither the area medical officer or the physiotherapist notified the family that this had been requested. Anyway, she did a subsequent report, which she then contradicted herself and said that there was no mobility issues outside.
Okay.
The parents got the files, and they noted that in some of the HSE files, the word Munchausen was written. You're familiar with Munchausen syndrome?
Yes. So I know it's a very, very, very complicated, and it was a case through the courts over a couple of years. Just if you can just move it, because time is of the essence. We just we're going to try and keep it to the hour. So just
the family decided to go to the legal route, and thankfully found Stephen Kerwin, who is an absolutely excellent litigator.
Our mutual friend.
Our mutual friend, could not recommend him highly enough. This man is going to go very, very far.
Yes. Stephen is a past pupil of mine, and I have to say an outstanding student that I have really, really fond memories of. So Stephen, then you engaged the services of Stephen.
The families engaged Stephen, and he came back and he said, look, can we attach this other child's case? So this was the second child who has spina bifida. And yes, so both families decided to go ahead, went to the High Court.
My thing is DCA Warriors. You're here to speak for DCA Warriors.
Yes, the two families decided to go ahead with Stephen, and it went to the High Court, and the High Court ruled against the families. It was then went to the Court of Appeal in Dublin, and again, the three justices ruled against the families. It's interesting to note too that on 2 occasions, we'll say this happened, when the child who has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome went to meet the area medical officer, first of all in the HSE, to be assessed for the primary medical cert. It was in a room that isn't wheelchair accessible, and the area medical officer instructed the child to stand up and walk, and he fell down. So we move it along then, and in the High Court of Appeal, you can see one of the children there outside. The building this was held in is not wheelchair accessible, and this was a case on primary medical cert to wheelchair users. So again, the High Court of Appeal, they ruled against the families, and then went into the Supreme Court, and both families would like to completely, they cannot express their gratitude to Stephen Kerwin, who ran this case, enough. Stephen got 2 barristers on board. Derek Shortall, who was involved all the way through, another excellent litigator, and for the Supreme Court, Michael Lynn, who was just fantastic. So, long and short, after all the years, the Supreme Court judgment was issued in June of this year, and the families won on all points of law.
Fantastic news.
It is, but now it looks like the judgment was issued on the 18th of June. Families have gone in the interim and been granted the primary medical cert because they've cited the Supreme Court judgment. But the 2 families who took the proceedings and won the victory for this are still without anything at all from the Disabled Drivers Board, and this is 3 months on. They don't have primary medical cert, they have no answers, and I believe they've now instructed their solicitor, Stephen, to re-enter the case before the Supreme Court because the Disabled Drivers Board have decided not to respond, it appears.
Right. A story that's quite similar to what Enda had to say earlier on, just this stone wall.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, Margaret, I know that we'll be putting up the links. You've sent me over some links that people can use if they want to make contact with your website. So the link for that will be available, underneath the video.
Thank you, Anna, and may I wish you the very best of luck in your new venture. We have 26,000 plus members on our site, and an awful lot of them will be wanting to speak to you. And I thank them all for all the work they are doing to help each other. Thanks, Anna.
And thank you, Margaret. I suppose I just find you a hugely inspirational woman. You started off with it was very, very small. It was a little page, and then it grew. And you have, I suppose, escorted or helped and guided these families through the courts and stood with them. And it's fantastic, really. So,
many more to come, please God.
So now this brings us to the latter half of Central Ground, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend, Marion McGowan. Marion is a university lecturer, she's a journalist, and she has been a civil rights activist going back many, many years. Marion is going to be joining me every week to anchor our panel discussion on the hot topic of the week. So, Marion, over to you. What was this week's hot topic?
Well, there was an awful lot of choice there, Anna, but I've decided, taking everything into account, I wanted to pose a question, and it's around our friend from the Gulf Gate, your friend and mine, for want of a better word, our Judge Seamus Woulfe. And I've decided to focus on this because when you actually take into account what has been happening in terms of even the stories we've heard this evening about people seeking justice, it really does question, is our system working or not? And I just want to pose 3 questions in terms of this. 1, is his position tenable or untenable? And if it's untenable, why is he still there? And why haven't we got the mechanisms to hold the judiciary to account? We can answer that question when we look at what has been happening in the legislature. I'm suggesting that his position is untenable because he failed to understand his own infringement on the separation of powers of doctrine. Yeah, he's failed to understand that. And it's a doctrine we rely on to interpret and adjudicate in cases before the Supreme Court. He did that by turning up and being cushy and socializing, etc., with politicians. We know that doctrine of separation, yeah, where there's the separation of powers. Is it untenable because he's failed to adhere to the very restrictions on movement he himself wrote? Is it untenable because, as Attorney General, yeah, he actually stopped the 219 Act that would allow judges to be held to account? So why isn't he in the news? He seems to have disappeared from the news. And I know that news changes rapidly in this world. But at the same time, when we're looking at Debenhams workers, and earlier on in June, when Judge Garrett Simon was accused by Breege Smith, she's actually said that, well, in his judgment, this judge has put the boot into workers' rights. Okay, so when you're looking at, well, what is the role of the judiciary, what are the roles of judges, and where is the separation there? Is his position tenable or is it untenable? Let me just give you a resume of Seamus Woulfe. He became a barrister in 1987. He was appointed Attorney General by Leo Varadkar to give government legal advice, and within 3 weeks of the formation of the new government, Taoiseach Michael Martin gave him the Supreme Court judge position. He's paid $223,597 plus expenses every year. There is no mechanism for disciplining judges, and this would change if the Judicial Council Act 2019 passed last year, if that had been implemented. But guess what? It hasn't been implemented, as ex-Attorney General Seamus Woulfe was the person charged with getting it up and running, and he prevaricated, stalled, delayed, and stopped it. So there you have a stalling and prevaricating that has actually served to stop us being legally able to hold judges, etc., to account. How terribly convenient, wouldn't you say? Yes. He also, in his career, he blocked Joan Collins, TD, her bill to enshrine public ownership of Irish water in the Constitution by keeping it at committee stage for 3 years. And he claimed he was going to amend it. Well, you know, he actually didn't get around to amending that. So, folks, what that means is that water and access to it is not, there is no public right, and it's not in public ownership now. How very convenient for everybody. But what he also did was, his advice on the Occupied Territories Bill actually allowed Simon Coveney to block it. And he advised the government that an eviction ban during the pandemic would be unconstitutional, and this actually was incorrect and was incorrect advice. And he had several appointments, including legal assessor for the fitness to practice committees of the Irish Medical Council and the Nursing and Midwifery Board of Ireland. And as a junior counsel, you'll like this one, and I think we will all will. He was acted in the Beef Tribunal, and he actually took the Irish government to the European Court of Human Rights because there was a long delay in his professional fees being paid. So he knows how to use the judicial system. Good on his team. So,
Marion, can I hold you there?
Oh, I'm on the roll. Maybe you shouldn't, Anna.
Because I think I do need to hold you there, because there's just too much information to absorb on this man. And we need to devote an entire programme to him.
But we won't. I don't think so, Anna.
I think you have done a fantastic job in kind of giving us an overview of his career to date. And as you were speaking, I'm saying, why, oh my, why wasn't this brought out on mainstream media in the way that you have done it? And so you asked the question there, is his position tenable? And it's I'm going to put that question now to each of our guests. So, Enda, Marion mentioned there about the water referendum and all of that. and that is an issue that I know is very, very, very dear to your heart. But the question is Seamus Woulfe's position tenable?
Well, Marion's given a great overview there, and the way it comes with the legal terminology and all of that, simply it is just a classic case of the huge disconnect that these guys have between the ordinary people and that they live in a parallel universe. They have all these rules and regulations, all these agreements and what have you. They flaunt them. They look at them and they snigger at them and they walk away. Don't apply to us. We see it day in and day out. He's just another example. He's a perfect man to be a Supreme Court judge and haven't be coming from an AG. He's just typical of what happens as we see it. And the terrible thing about it, Anna, is they fundamentally don't care. There was a time when they would try and hide stuff like that. Nowadays, it seems that they just say, up yours. There's nothing we can do about it. And we continue on down the road, spin along, Gilly, and nothing will happen. Terrible, I'm sorry. I'm so cynical about this kind of behaviour.
Well, I suppose, Enda, you have every right to be cynical because, of course, you lost in the Supreme Court yourself, and it was because of that loss in the Supreme Court that you had to take your issue on the discharge of sewage into Lough Foyle. You had to take it to the EU Commission, and of course, you won. Once you got out of Ireland, you won your case in Europe. So you have every right to be cynical. So if I could just move on now to Luke Peter. Luke, Peter, what do you think of Seamus Woulfe? Is his position tenable?
Well, I'm not sure. Yeah, I suppose it is a point that Marion raised, and that I think Breed Smith raised, but in the mainstream media, the only one I saw to raise it was Claire Byrne the other day, where there was all this talk about separation of powers, and no one at all was asking, where was the separation of powers below in Clifton when they were all sitting around the top table? Now, the Dáil obviously is back today, so what I will watch with great interest is, I imagine some TD will raise the matter, will attempt to raise it in the House, be it Alan Kelly or Breed Smith or, anyone like that, and what the reaction from the Ceann Comhairle will be. That will be fascinating to see. If they're told, stop now where you are, you're bordering on dodgy territory, you can't talk about things like that in this House. What will happen then? That'll bring the thing back into the public conversation. There'll be legal disputes, all of that, and I think that's what I'll watch with intent now, is what unfolds in the Dáil chamber in the coming days and weeks on that topic. But I am.
And moving on to you, Mark, you've accompanied the families to the Supreme Court, and what are your views on Woulfe? Do you think his position is tenable?
No. I'm very interested in what the previous speaker said, and I quite agree with him across the board. And I contrast Mr. Woulfe's attitude, and for him to be able to go to the Court of Human Rights to get his fees, and you contrast this with children being treated the way I've spoken of the two children here tonight. Complete medical negligence. No diagnosis, no treatment. Minister for Health refuses to do absolutely anything for these children. They're going to London, they're paying for it. The families are mentally, emotionally, physically, economically broken, and these people are laughing at us. What I would like to know is exactly what. I want to hear suggestions on what we can do, because we've seen in the last week what happened with Commissioner Hogan, and I think that was a lot of that was the Mr. Hogan drip fed. Of course, a lot of things, it would have probably gone better for him had he come out in the beginning and made a complete apology and given a complete rundown. For whatever reason, he decided he wouldn't. These people now think they're untouchable, but what I'm seeing, Anna, is I'm old enough to remember when people said, the church, enough, the scandals came out, the church completely controlled everything, Ireland in every way. Politicians, you're next. Judges, all of you, you're next, because I think people have enough. I really want to know what Marion has to say and the rest of them. What can we do now as a nation to stop these people?
Oh, indeed.
Okay, so that question over to you now, Marion, just to wind up our discussion for this evening.
Well, I actually think that we're looking at a need to have a very clear approach to being able to hold people to account. But when you're at the stage in a country where the very people who are being held to account can actually stop that legislation happening,
Yeah.
that's a joke. And actually, we need people both in public office and in the judiciary who have a standard which we deserve and we should be able to hold them account to. I think it'll definitely need a whole section on its own to look at what we as people can, where we have redress under law. Happy to publish some stuff on that later on, but I'm very conscious that we're running out of time at the moment. But I take your point, Margaret. They will, it's when people will say, actually, we don't accept this, we're holding you to account, and we will use both pressure to bring this into the light, as well as the laws that are there. It's a drip, slowly by slowly. And I like the way you said, we're coming for you.
There's a tipping point and it's here.
Yeah.
And I think that is a very, very good note on which to end our panel discussion this evening. I'd like to finish up now by thanking each and every one of my guests this evening, Enda, Luke, Peter, Margaret and Marion. I'm sure you would agree they are amazing, inspirational people, who are not holding back in putting their shoulder to the wheel to try and make this a better country. I'd like to thank most sincerely Stephen Kerr from the Irish Informer, who has created this platform that has allowed this broadcast to go out live. And finally, I'd like to thank you at home for tuning our way and for watching. I hope that you'll go away inspired by what you have heard, and that it will kind of drive you now to become an activist if you're not already an activist. So until we meet again next Wednesday evening at 8 o'clock, Bant Day Orif Gulim. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you, Emma.